The leadership team at Dwell Church. Really excited you could come here for story night. And I'm wondering, Lisa, can we get? Oh, look, the music just turned off. She's like mind meld. So I want to first just say that for story night, we want to start by just reminding everyone to hold closely the stories and the people who are being devastated by the fires down in LA. Matt at the end will help us kind of synthesize and wrap up the stories from tonight and can also share a little bit about some of the conversations he's been having with people down there and how we can, as a church, be involved and helpful. But for now, we are going to launch off our story night. So first, a little context. Our story nights are modeled after something called The Hearth, which is a model by Mark Yaconelli based on a book he wrote called Between the Listening and the Telling, How Stories Can Save Us. And it's a model of community storytelling that emphasizes the power of the interaction between brave storytelling and deep listening. And so that's what we're doing tonight. It's also based on this model that it matters who tells the story, and sometimes you might feel like your perspectives, your views are not represented in the dominant stories that are being told. And at Dwell Church, we believe that our church is the stories of our community. And so we've made a rhythm of about once a quarter, instead of having our usual service, doing these storytelling nights. And for many people we hear, this is actually their favorite of all the things that we do. So you guys are here on a perfect day. Let's see, the last thing is your instructions. We do have 4 brave storytellers today that I'm really excited for you to listen to. But those of you in the audience are not passive listeners. There is a job for you too. So we've got our brave storytellers. You guys are our deep listeners. This is not a show. You're not an audience. And you're not going to hear stories that are all tied up neatly with a bow. And so your job is to sit and listen deeply and think about how you might be asked to grow and to have deep empathy for others and what might be in it for you. So that's your job. Here's how it'll go. 4 storytellers over about 40 minutes. I will introduce each one, and then you'll be gifted with their story. And then at the end, if you have water or tea or just a virtual beverage, we will lift our beverages in a toast to something that felt important to the storyteller, just as a way for us to remember what was important that anchored their story. The theme for tonight is basically the theme, I knew the moment, ... And so it's really about a moment of transformation in their lives. Okay, with that, we're going to start with somebody near and dear to my heart. His name is Ryan Nichols. Yes, relation. And I asked Ryan how he would describe what he does, not his job title, but kind of what energizes him. He says, I help companies connect their customers with AI. So if you're interested in AI, talk to him later. The most recent song he listened to, which was playing in the car on our way here, is The Times They Are A-Changin' by Bob Dylan. Research and prep for the fact that we're going to go watch the Bob Dylan movie with Timothée Chalamet. Number 3, I asked him why he raised his hand for this opportunity, and he said to help people find God in unexpected places. So with that, I'm going to invite Ryan up.
Thank you, Eunice. Thank you, dear. And hello, everybody. We're going to try not to break the streak of this being the most favorite night. That's kind of a knock on wood sort of moment, I guess. My name's Ryan, and I'm really excited to share with you tonight the moment when I learned that God is in the canyon. So there's something you need to know about me in order to make sense of this story, and that it's kind of I'm a mountain guy, not a mountain man exactly, despite the beard, but more somebody who's framed a lot of his life in relation to mountains. You know, it's certainly where I get a lot of joy, whether skiing or backpacking or mountain biking. It's also just how I think about things like my career, you know, like grinding through the plateaus or what's the next peak. My dad actually, his finance colleagues called him Mountain Mike because the mountains are where he made all of his good investment decisions, and that's certainly where I've made all my good decisions too, including the decision to propose to Eunice in the mountains. My dad took me to the mountains, and I take my boys to the mountains. My oldest, his first backpacking trip was at 2 years old, and Tyler was camping at 2 months old. So it's a spot that also over time I've learned to hear the still silent voice of God. Like that's where I was as I developed my Christian faith as an adult. But that's a different story, actually. Tonight's story is about how I learned to be with God, not just in those mountain moments, but also in the canyon. And it occurs during a season of my life when I was in between jobs. I had this epic backpacking trip planned in the Sierras, because that's what I do, right? That's where I go to make big decisions, figure out what's next. And this time around, it didn't work out that way because of a wildfire, which I know a lot of us are thinking about this week. Wildfires disrupt the best laid plans, and it did for me that summer. So I had to come up with the plan B. So for me, this was a few Google searches, and I called a ranger station, and then I was off to an unexpected pilgrimage to the Grand Canyon, which is not the sort of place I usually go for backpacking, but there's this trip, which is called the Escalante route, where you descend from the south rim of the Grand Canyon and you spend 5 days backpacking along the river, and then you climb back up. And I embarked on this trip, which ended up being just 5 wild, spirit-filled days that I experienced as walking with God and seeing God in the canyon. And I thought I'd just share a little bit of what I learned on that trip, the moment when I saw God in the canyon. And it started with the realization that I've always thought of him as kind of a mountaintop God, but God's a lot like a canyon too. For those who have been to the Grand Canyon, I mean, boy, it is impossible to comprehend the Grand Canyon. I mean, the vastness of it, the grandeur of it. From the top, you can sometimes barely even see the river that grew the whole thing. And that's true from the bottom too. You get down there, and then you can't even see the rim, right? It's just too vast to really understand all at once. And I came to understand that God's a lot like that, right? The best you can do is just kind of be with him in a moment, right? And just get some little glimpse of who God is to you in that moment. God is doing work in the canyon. I learned that as well. In the Grand Canyon, a lot of the work is being done by the river. And when you're at the bottom, it is just impossible to imagine how these waters could carve this vast trench in the desert. And there are some showy, rapidy sections, but most of the work is done relentlessly through long stretches of time, just by showing up and moving forward. And that's how the river creates the canyon. And I think I learned that's how God works a lot of times too. It's not with the showy, splashy work of the rapids. It's God doing the relentless work every day. God does give gifts in the canyon. I learned about that a little bit too. When you're in the desert, the biggest gift is water. And when you climb up from the river of the Grand Canyon, water is hard to come by. And so one of my days was a very long walk up through to what I imagined was going to be an oasis. It was marked in the map as a spring. It was halfway up. I thought maybe I'd even take a little dip in the waters. And then I arrived and it was this, a mossy puddle. And then I dipped my filter in, and I filled up my water bottle, and it quenched my thirst. And it ends up, it's a total miracle to have a spring like this halfway up the canyon. And it wasn't what I was imagining or maybe even hoping for, but it was what I needed in that moment. And I think I learned a little something about, God's gifts being like that too. Not always what we imagine, but oftentimes kind of what we need right in the moment. The final thing I learned was that God brings us out of the canyons, right? We have our time in canyons, and then we have times when we climb up. And I remember the last sunrise of my time in the canyon. And sunrises, when you're on a mountaintop, the sunrise is sudden and it's dramatic, and the sun is up and you're bathed in light. And it works a little different when you're at the bottom of a canyon, because the sunrise kind of sneaks up on you, right? You get the light reflecting on the walls of the canyon long before you see the sun. So you start hiking and it's still cold, right? Because you're not in the sunlight yet. And then it'll peek over the edge of the canyon, and it's amazing. And then it's gone again, right? As you hike and follow the contours of the canyon walls. And then you'll get another sunrise, right? Like 10 minutes later, as you kind of peek out and the sun peaks above the rim of the canyon. And it felt like God again, right? We have a God of second chances, right? There's never just one sunrise. And as long as you keep on moving forward, which I did, up this big hill, and inevitably you're at the rim, you're out of the canyon. And for me, after 5 days of this like wild solitude time with God, it was actually a little tough coming back to the rim. Like, it's the Grand Canyon, there was a tour bus there, and this open heart that I'd been cultivating over the last 5 days, I start to feel the close a little bit, right? With a little bit of judgment, every selfie stick. Yeah. And this is, me at the rim, right? With everyone taking pictures behind me. And yet this is where, God leads us, right? Out of canyons and back into, the messy life that we live, right? With his people, with our neighbors. And that's where we return after our time in the canyon. So I had these amazing 5 days, and I learned a lot. And it's so hard to remember these things about God in the canyon. A very short time after this experience, I broke my foot. This also is a different story, but I was chasing my son down a flight of stairs and broke one of the smallest bones in your body that just took me out. I needed foot surgery. I was taken for a while, like away from the mountain experiences that I love, which also are like how I cope with stress and also part of my identity. Like I started this new job, and I didn't want to introduce myself to everybody like as the guy on crutches. That's not who I was. I was the mountain guy, right? And so I was definitely in a valley. It was an emotional valley. And seeing those same lessons that I learned about God from a physical valley and applying them to the emotional valley was really hard. I just had this experience, but I wasn't seeing God, the grandeur of the canyon, right, from the edge of this emotional canyon. I wasn't seeing the work that God was doing at the bottom of it. I wasn't seeing the relentless flow of the waters shaping something better. I wasn't experiencing any of this as a gift. But then I started to, right? Slowly, step by step, I started to experience these things and led to these things by God, whether it was just small things like conversations in the backyard with friends that were stopping by. Thank you, Alonzo. Thank you, Phil. Whether it was conversations with colleagues, right, that my newfound vulnerability kind of made possible, right? People telling me about when they'd been hurt, right? And conversations that we wouldn't normally have had in this corporate environment. These were ways that even just experiencing the sunshine in the backyard, right, that I felt led step by step out of this emotional canyon and other canyons in life. And so that's what I wanted to leave you with today was just gratitude that this mountain guy came to realize that I serve a God who's so much more than a mountaintop God, right? Serve a God who's also with us in the canyons. And so with that, let's raise a glass if you have one and have a toast to God in the canyon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ryan. I think I could probably do this myself, actually. Well, look at that. I am not the completely non-tech person in our family, apparently. All right, I'm excited for our next storyteller. Ginny Scarda is going to tell us about a transformative moment. And when I asked Ginny where she calls home, she said the Bay is now home. But she did grow up all over, so ask her about that later. What do you do? She said, weekdays I'm an engineer, but on weekends, how appropriate, I'm gearing up for mountain adventures. Climbing, backcountry skiing, and other wild and crazy things. So maybe you and Ryan need to get together and try not to break some bones. Her favorite word is lunch, which I think is pretty cool. Okay, and why she said yes to this invitation. She said that Matt had asked her for some time, and she had started to have some realizations about some things that she's been working on and forgetting and being reminded of, and that actually taking the time to compile things into a story would be a good way to solidify the lessons that she feels like she's needed to learn. So, Ginny, I leave the floor to you.
I was going to sit, but I guess I can stand. Yeah, very appropriate. I'm going after Ryan. Thank you. That was an amazing story. Yeah, I think maybe one of the identities I have is pretty accurately summed up by this hat I love that says Backcountry Babe. I think that's pretty accurate. Yeah, so this past year on paper for me was amazing. I spent almost every weekend in the mountains with one of my good friends, and we were constantly blowing our minds. We were climbing and skiing peaks that we never thought would be possible. But about halfway through the year, I kind of started to feel a bit hopeless, meaningless, even as I was doing all these outdoor adventures that I love and that I know fill me. And it started to feel more and more like I was maybe using these trips to run away from something, but I was too scared, to stay home and find out what that was. And then I guess I was kind of forced to, not at home. I was in Chicago in October for work, and I visited my aunt's house. And as I walked through the door, I realized that the last time I had been there was 5 years ago, when I was driving across the country with some of my mom's things just after she had suddenly passed away. And that visit really shook me. When I came back, I felt the grief again, really strong and fresh. It was really raw, uncontrollable, similar to how I had felt when I came back to California 5 years ago. But something was different now. I realized that 5 years ago I had somehow also had hope, and I couldn't understand now how I could possibly have had hope then. Maybe it was just that I hadn't realized what I had lost then, and maybe this darker, more meaningless, hopeless grief was somehow more real, less naive. And then about a month later, I was having dinner with a friend I hadn't seen in a while. And I mentioned that it had been 5 years since my mom had passed away. And she stared at me really shocked, and she said, "Really? It feels like it just happened." And then I remembered. I remembered that this friend was there the night my mom passed away. That the second I texted this friend that my mom was in the ICU in DC, she got on a plane and she flew across the country to support me. She had just started a stressful job at Tesla, but she came anyway. I didn't ask her to. I didn't know how much I needed it. She came anyway. And my mom was in a coma in the ICU for 2 weeks before she passed away. This friend came both weekends. And she did so much. She organized a message group so she could keep all my friends updated and I wouldn't have to. She came to the hospital. She was there. And sitting in the restaurant with this friend and starting to cry, I realized what had given me hope in that raw, fresh grief 5 years ago. It was this intense sense of gratitude. So thankful for the amazing kindness and love of this friend that I didn't know I needed, that I can never repay, that's forever intertwined with the memory of losing my mom. And don't get me wrong, I still feel plenty of anger and bitterness and sadness. And I think it's this gratitude that helps me process that grief and think about my future with hope. And this realization was kind of further cemented when I went back to DC this past December. I've been kind of avoiding this for a while, scared to go back, worried it would just dig me further into that pit of, loneliness, bitterness. And definitely, those were some of the first emotions I felt there. And I was really shocked to find that the first time I cried on that trip, I cried tears of gratitude. I was just overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude that there's this place I can go back to and know that my mom was so happy, that she was living such a meaningful and impactful life. So thankful for the amazing community that she had created out there. It was a really paradoxical thing that the two strongest emotions I felt on that trip were grief and gratitude. And I felt that gratitude again coming back from the East Coast to my amazing community I have here, to my adopted parents, Lisa and Gonzo, who I met in Grief Share, who have endlessly supported me and loved on me since the beginning of my grief journey 5 years ago, to my amazing roommate, Cindy, to Minji I just met last night, to my church community, to my amazing friends. I think in my search for hope and meaning this year, I've been looking everywhere except my darkest time, losing my mom. But it was really in that time that God met me in the most powerful ways. It's by far the strongest reminder I have of how loved and held I am. And I hope this is just the beginning of the story. I hope that powerful reminder continues to drive me to seek and prioritize church and spiritual community, and to find ways to so fiercely love the people around me in the ways that I've been so fiercely loved, and to stop running away from my grief, to lean into it, and to hope that something beautiful can come out of it. So I like to raise a toast to both the darkness and the light in our hardest times. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginny. What a powerful and important story and message. Thanks for agreeing to do that. Okay, let's take a collective breath, and we're going to welcome up our third storyteller, Maxwell Kwan. I have just, because of this story night, gotten to know Maxwell a little bit better. I asked him where he calls home, and he said, "I call home a place where I feel comfortable and safe, whether with family and friends or spending time by myself at my favorite museum and restaurant." Favorite museum, by the way, for him is the Met, and the restaurant is Restoration Hardware in Palo Alto. Okay, what do you do? He's a student at Berkeley, and he says he likes to do everything, proven by the fact that he's changed majors 5 times, and he's worked in a startup, architecture, politics, and other things. So once again, follow up with him about those things. His favorite word is sonder. How many people here know what sonder means? No. I was like, saunter? He's like, no, sonder. Okay, sonder apparently means it's the idea of how everyone's life is as complicated as yours. So, learn something new. Okay, and the reason that Maxwell said yes to this invitation is that one of his driving values that he learned in high school is to feel comfortable being uncomfortable and to say yes to everything. I have high school children, and I'm not sure that they would articulate anything quite that way. So you are in for a special treat to hear Maxwell tell his story of transformation.
Thank you, Eunice. My story is called "The Moment I Knew I Couldn't Look Away." And the idea from the story really came from this season of my life. And a concept I really love is the 7-year rule. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it was a concept developed by researchers at Oxford. And it's the idea that every 7 years, or by the 7-year point, a friendship will either cease to exist, or it will be the moment where they undergo the most dramatic transformation. And tonight I'm going to tell you about my first friendship that hit that goal a couple months ago. And this is my best friend, and we actually met at Christian private school up on 42nd Avenue, and it was a tiny, tiny Christian private school. There were only 56 students from kindergarten through 12th grade. There were 7 students in my graduating 8th grade class. And I just remember she came for 7th grade, and this was actually her second year of middle school. And we were actually in the same class because since the school is so tiny, they had to combine classes. And immediately we just clicked. We got super close. We always sat next to each other. And it really felt like it was us against the world. We navigated everything that the average middle schooler would navigate. a power-hungry PE teacher who tried to write everyone up for everything, a hormonal teenage boy who had the most Chinese tiger mom, and all the other complexities of middle school. But one day, the school announced that they were shutting down because there were not enough students, but they were going to finish out the year. And I remember I was really at peace with it because it was a really hard year for me. But she was really sad because she came from a very toxic environment and she felt finally like she had a home. But then I went on to high school and she went on to her third year of middle school. And just like most childhood friendships, when you don't see each other every day, you start to drift apart. And throughout that time, we survived a pandemic, the ending of other friendships, and the passing of my best friend. But we still kept a friendship. And there were other times that our friendship was tested, like the time I was really scared to come out to her because she was the most religious friend that I had, and her family was very conservative. But she was like, okay, yeah, it's really obvious. But, okay, laughing a little too hard. But there were so many times that I also felt like I was putting so much more into our friendship to keep it alive. Because when I first went to Berkeley, I was the only person who would text and the only person who would call. And when it was time for us to call, she would say that she was busy, so I'd let her reschedule, and then she would miss that date again. And I just felt like she wasn't putting as much into our relationship to keep it alive. So I finally had a breaking point during my second year of college, and I told her, like, I just need more from you. And she really saw where I was coming from, so she put the effort in. And this past summer, we had the best summer. It was really the closest that we've ever been. We saw each other almost every day. We had sleepovers every week. Our favorite sweet treat was going to Stellato for gelato multiple times a week. And we'd go to drives on the beach, have debrief sessions at the hot tub, and we spent the 4th of July together on a boat, watching the fireworks over the San Francisco Bay. It was just the best summer. And we spent so much time together in each other's homes that we got used to each other's families, and she started meeting my college friends and getting close with them too. And this summer, we each went to New York separately, so when I had a chance to go in mid-November, I asked her if she wanted to come, and she said, of course, and she was really excited, even more excited than me, so we booked the flights and the hotel, and she started planning outfits. And during that time, I was incredibly busy. I was phasing out my term serving on our town sustainability committee. We were in the process of submitting our climate action plan to the state. Then I went straight into election mode, working on the Harris campaign and supporting a friend's run for city council. And I was still managing my normal course load as a junior, majoring in poli-sci. And while I was thinking back to this time, I remembered I was also fostering a mama dog and her 4 puppies. So as the election came up, I was really stressed. I knew it was on the line, and for the second time, I decided to work the polls, but this would be the first time that I could actually vote. And on my first day working at the poll center, I was checking Facebook, and the first post was from Matt. And he posted something along the lines, for those of you who are voting for Trump, and then in parentheses, I still love you. Why are you doing so if his cabinet is not supporting him this time around? And one of the responses was from my best friend's mom, and she said, I believe that his policies align with God. And those 8 words really shattered me. I had known that they voted for him in 2016 and 2020, but I thought it was incredibly different this time around. And I was spending so much time with their family that I thought there's no way that he could vote for him. I couldn't imagine someone such close proximity to me doing that. And it was really something that I realized I was trying to ignore as a possibility, but that was the moment I knew I couldn't look away. So after working the polls that day, I went on a run because it's my favorite coping mechanism, And over the 5-mile run, I came to the conclusion that I don't feel comfortable around her family anymore. As a queer person, as a person of color, as someone who fights for climate change, social justice, victims of abuse. But I knew that I wanted to maintain our friendship because in my core, I felt that she didn't share those views. But then election day came around and I worked the polls for 16 hours straight, and I was starting to develop a cold even though I never get sick. So then when I went home, I made tomato soup for dinner and turned on the news and checked the polls. And I saw that he was ahead, but I wasn't worried because I knew that it would be close and I had faith that she would win. But then I started getting concerned calls from friends saying things like, we're about to have an orange as a president, or when are we booking our tickets out of here? And I told them not to worry. I told them that it was the red mirage. The red states are able to count their votes so quickly because no one really lives there. And it was gonna take days to count the votes. You did everything that you could do to this point. You did your part, stop checking the polls, enjoy life, get some sleep, because no matter who wins, there's gonna be chaos. This is the calm before the storm. But then the next morning I woke up knowing that something immediately was off. If alternate timelines existed like NASA thinks there might be, I felt like I had entered it. And I avoided all the news and social media because I just wanted to live in a place for a couple of hours where I didn't know. But in my gut, I already knew. So since I'm so helplessly type A, I immediately went into planning mode, trying to figure out which country my family should escape to. But then when I finally checked and I found out the news, I think I really entered survival mode. I felt broken. I felt like I saw our country in a whole new light. It was moving backwards. That Saturday, I had plans to hang out with my best friend, but I knew that things were going to go down. So when she offered to drive, I said, it's okay, I'll pick you up, because I knew I didn't want to be the one without the car. But she got in my car and asked me how I was doing, and I answered honestly with, not that good. And she was like, why, what's wrong? And I said, the election? And she responded with, yeah, it's really sad. And then when she said that, I was like, oh, maybe she did vote for Kamala. And as we continued driving, it was silent, but after 2 blocks, she said to me, what's wrong? And I said, do you really want to know what's wrong? And she said yes, so I went into a huge rant, starting with what her mom posted on Facebook. Then I dove into systemic oppression, victims of sexual assault, members of the LGBTQ community, access to abortion, education, and Project 2025. I told her how I didn't feel comfortable stepping foot into a home where they voted against my rights. We were headed to dinner on Burlingame Ave, and my tirade lasted the whole 15 minutes until we pulled into a space. And she said, I don't even know what to say. I feel like you hate me and hate my family now. And I was kind of dumbfounded. I replied with, I don't hate you, I love you, and I care about you. That's why I want to talk to you about this. And so then, so then she said, okay, the thing that I'm most worried about right now is what's gonna happen to New York. And I was shocked, and I said, wow, that really wasn't on my mind. And she replied with, I really need you to let me know what we're gonna do. So obviously, we decided to not go. And one thing that really stuck with me is she kept saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, when I pointed out the flaws in her thinking. And I think that's such a dangerous precedent and idea to have, that you're kind of excused from things because you choose to not know and choose to ignore it. And eventually we kept going back and forth, and it wasn't really going anywhere. And she was crying at this point, and she said to me, like, we've been through so much. I can't believe this is what's ending our relationship. And I was shocked. I felt like that was the most tone-deaf thing that she said, because I was there through her ending 3 other friendships that ended for kind of dumb reasons. But I just felt really invalidated because I was confused that she was excusing and invalidating my rights and morals and just standing up for others as being a bad reason to end a friendship. But as she was crying, I felt really bad. And I would be lying if I didn't say that I wanted to take it all back, and I wished that we could go back to the way it was, but I knew it would never be the same. And she told me that she would have her dad pick her up, but I was like, it's okay, like, I can drive you home, and I kept trying to ask to drive her home because it was getting dark, but we were in Burlingame. But the reason why I kept asking to drive her home is because I knew that she would say that I abandoned her there, because all of her other friendships that ended, she said that they abandoned them. But I didn't forcefully drive her home because that would be kidnapping. But before she left, I told her, I love you and I care about you so much, and I'll always be here if you need anything. But I need you to start questioning things, questioning everything. We're entering dark times, and I need you to be aware of what's happening. And I really don't think that any of that got to her. And after this event, I really struggled, and I asked myself if I did the right thing. I was asking my family if I did the right thing, my friends if I did the right thing, my therapist if I did the right thing. And I kept struggling with the idea that God calls us to love everyone, but how could we do that if we're trying to maintain a healthy distance from someone? Is it even possible? And I'm still really not sure, but it's still a question that I'm going to continue seeking the answer to. And a song that's really helped me through this season is a song by Gigi Perez, and she has a verse that says, "Love was the law, and religion was taught." And I really believe that the rise of Christian nationalism can be attributed to the church employing a fear-based theology and Trump perpetuating populist ideologies. And sometimes I question if I'm missing something. I question if I have the wrong views, if that behavior is what God is. But every time I go down that rabbit hole, I come up with the same answer, that following Jesus is truly about loving others, fighting against injustice, and uplifting others. I wonder if my proximity to whiteness, or specifically my former best friend's whiteness, allowed them to not put me in the same category of those that they are hurting. Or did they place excuses in their thinking, such as, he's a Christian but a Democrat, he's our friend but he's Chinese, he's our neighbor but he's gay. And I wake up every morning asking myself what I could be doing more because I don't feel like I do enough. But I can't be friends with someone who believes that there isn't work to be done, that not knowing excuses them from the atrocities occurring around the world and our own country. And not really caring who wins really highlights a whole nother level of privilege that I hope to never experience. It's not our lesson to learn, but it will continue to be the burden that we bear. And while I still grieve what I lost, I hold on to the hope that maybe one day she'll understand why I couldn't look away, and maybe one day they all will too. Thank you. And we'll be raising a toast to Love is the Law.
Love is the law. Thank you. Thanks, Maxwell. Just another reminder of what it takes to do brave storytelling and for us to do deep listening. So thank you for that. All right, we are rounding the corner for our last storyteller, somebody who will be very familiar to those who attend Dwell, because it is our very own Lisa Mario, where she calls home brand new news as of Friday. She and Eddie closed on a house in San Bruno. So San Bruno is home. What does Lisa do? She says she's raising 3-year-old twin boys, i.e. keeping them alive, and she leads worship at Dwell Church. Okay, why did you raise your hand to tell this story? She says, I want people to know that their story isn't over. So with that, Lisa, bring us home.
She also asked me in her little email, what's the last song you listened to? And I'm a little sad you didn't share that it is I'm Not That Girl from the Wicked soundtrack that I've been listening to on repeat, because that woman's voice is like changing my brain chemistry. I walked down the aisle on a beach in San Diego in June. to the song Beautiful Things. The words say, "You make beautiful things out of the dust." I got married when I was 28, and on my wedding day, I knew that marriage would be hard, but I believed that if I trusted God enough and I worked hard and I really committed, then I would be married till death do us part. That's what I believe that people do, especially that's what I believe that good Christians do. I grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor, and my parents actually just this last weekend celebrated 44 years of marriage. But it only took about 6 months for me to realize that my marriage was going to be harder than I realized or had ever imagined. At the time, I was on staff at a very large church, and I was serving in a very visible role. And I was terrified to tell anybody that I was really struggling. And I spent a lot of years just smiling and telling people, no, it's great, things are great, and we're great, and everything's okay. But behind closed doors, I was not okay, and our marriage was not great. We went to counseling on and off. We saw multiple counselors, hoping someone would help us fix the problems that were in our marriage. I read a lot of the marriage books, a lot of which, by the way, are really toxic and really patriarchal and not at all helpful. I tried everything that I could think of. I spent years just begging God for a miracle, begging him to change something. And I remember one particular night, I was lying in bed. I can just still vision my bedroom, looking at the ceiling fan. And I felt like the walls were just closing in on me, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't have a name for it then, but with time and therapy have helped me to understand that was my first anxiety attack. I could not see a way out. My marriage, as it was not honoring to God, but I didn't feel like a divorce would be honoring to him either. I was afraid of losing my career in ministry if I told anyone or if I got a divorce. I felt really, really trapped. There's a verse in Psalm 18 that says, "The cords of death entangled me." There were some really dark moments where I felt like death was going to be a better option. I never intentionally wanted to end my life, but I would sometimes fantasize about getting hit by a bus, or sometimes like just some other way of my life ending. That felt like the only way out. I remember God bringing another verse that's just a little bit farther down in Psalm 18, that he has brought me out into a spacious place. And I would just cling to that image of like a spacious place, just envision myself like maybe in like a field, somewhere I could breathe. And I would cling to that like a lifeline. And then after days and months and years, it was 4 years actually, I came to the realization that I could not do it anymore. I literally woke up on a Thursday morning and it was like, I'm done. There was no particular instigating event. The day had just finally come. That was my moment that I just knew. I remember thinking, I don't know what God thinks about this or me, but I'll deal with him later. Our marriage had a level of unhealthiness and toxicity that I could not overcome by myself. These were not issues of like, oh, he's squeezing the toothpaste tube in the middle, or he leaves his underwear out, or he's watching too much football on Sundays, or even just, I'm not happy. There were issues of ongoing, unrepentant behavior on his part, and I had to leave. And I can now, again, thanks to time and therapy, name that there was verbal and emotional abuse that I was enduring. And now, living on the other side of it, I would encourage someone who's in a similar situation to invite a few safe people to be a witness to your marriage, even if it's terrifying. For so long, I didn't tell anyone what was going on, and I suffered alone, needlessly. I didn't need to do that. And at the right times, they'll be the ones to encourage you to keep going, to try something else, find a new counselor. They'll pray with you. They'll pray for you. And they might also be the one to tell you, yeah, marriage is hard, but not this kind of hard. This is not normal. Or in the end, they'll be the ones to validate you and say, you have done everything you can. There's nothing else that you can do. One of my biggest fears about choosing to get divorced was that God would be done with me. I'd made such a mess of things that he wouldn't be able to use me in ministry anymore. And not just ministry, but I kind of thought my life was over, that I had failed. My story was over at 32. And honestly, that just revealed a lot of wrong ways of thinking that I had about God. And I wouldn't have said this out loud, or there wasn't a conscious thought, but apparently I believe that if I had did the right things and did them in the right order, then God would work things out for me in a certain way, or that I expected or that I wanted him to. This May will mark 10 years since that Thursday morning, that moment that I knew. And my gosh, I sometimes think about that, and if I could go back and show myself a picture of what my life would look like now. have believed it. He does make beautiful things out of the dust. It wasn't the one I was thinking of when I walked down the aisle in 2011. But now I'm married to a wonderful man. I have 2 beautiful, healthy boys. I have an amazing faith community. And now I'm on a church staff where, thank God, I'm not fearful about sharing a struggle and getting fired. Matt? God has been better to me than I deserve, and I'm so grateful. So if you're somewhere in your story where you feel like it's over, or maybe you wish that it was over, don't give up, because it gets better. And it may not look like what you thought it was going to, but it's going to get better. So, my drink's over there. To your story not being over.
Thank you, Lisa. I don't want to underscore how hard it is for somebody on staff to tell a story like that. And you made me cry. Why? At the end. So I just want to read one quote from Mark Yaconelli and that book that Matt shared with me and other folks on the leadership team a little early on. He says, "The transformation occurs in the space between one heart and another. To be heard by someone who is present, open, and caring is to be led into freedom." So thank you for being the audience that listened. I'm going to invite Matt up to do a little synthesis and close us out.